you got to go along with it. I said, well, I appreciate your support, but at times I'm going to disagree with my supporters. I do not believe that this is the right project for San Diego. I do not believe it's the best for taxpayers, and we have other alternatives. Took a lot of heat, but I was proud of the fact that San Diegans stood with me in helping kill that project, and they were trying to get it in any which way. We finally killed it because we forced it to a public vote. I was able to build a coalition on the city council of Democrats and Republicans who agreed that we had to force it to a public vote. And I said, look, the San Diegans are very logical. If you think that this is such a great idea, because it's such a big project, $400 million, then they will agree with you. Why worry about putting this issue to a public vote? And of course they did a poll. It showed that only 15% of San Diegans would even hit yes, 80% were no, and they quietly killed the project thereafter. So will the forces in Washington be able to overcome reform? We're going to be up against a lot of opponents there. But I ultimately believe that if we get a few voices on the same side, that we can make a huge difference even in an environment of 435. Final thing I want to cover before we open up to questions, a starting point. I made pension reform a signature issue in San Diego for our roadmap to recovery. And we got it done because I felt it was the biggest financial challenge facing the city. We had to start there, we had to fix that. I've made a proposal called Fix Congress First. I created this proposal, put a brand name on it, Fix Congress First, because it, I believe, strikes at the very issue that we have in Washington that's broken, and that is a culture of Congress where they believe that they're above the law, where it's a closed system, where the public does not have transparency and accessibility. And so the Fix Congress First initiative is very simple. It says that any law passed by Congress shall apply to Congress. Do you know how many exemptions Congress has granted itself on major laws? They've granted themselves a sweetheart exemption on Obamacare. They were supposed to be treated like no other employee, and yet they were able to get a huge subsidy on the Obamacare exchanges. They exempted themselves from Public Records Act requirements. Right now, you can demand as a citizen or a member of the media, show me the records relating to the following topics. This case in veterans benefits, how you came up with these reimbursement rates for hospitals and this treatment. Any issue that they make a decision on, you can ask for the records related to that. Any emails, any letters, reports, correspondence. Every agency of the federal government has to adhere to this law, except the US Congress. They've exempted themselves from any Public Records Act requests. How many of you heard about the bills that are ironed out behind closed doors that are 1,100, 1,200, 1,300 pages long? They roll out and they immediately vote on them. And even members of Congress say, I haven't had a chance to read this. Oh, you can read it once it's passed. All right, if you're not interested in reading the law, fine. That's your decision to vote on something you haven't read. But by golly, the American people should be able to read that law. And so the Fix Congress First proposal requires that any legislation voted on in the House or the Senate shall be posted online for 72 hours before a roll call vote is held, so that we can look at it, and we can read it, and we can figure out what's in it, and then hopefully have time to communicate to our representatives our desire to vote yes or no. There are a number of other elements to the Fix Congress First proposal. I can tell you right now, I've talked to some folks back there who are in the House and the Senate, they don't like it. But a lot of my colleagues didn't like pension reform. Even Republicans didn't like the pension reform initiative at the beginning. But we built a public case for change. And I believe that these ideas are no-nonsense, common-sense approaches that the American people want to see implemented in Congress, whether they're Democrats or Republicans. So I'm making that my first focal point. We're going to be doing other things like pension reform legislation on a national level to bring what we did in San Diego on a more national scale. Yes, I'm going to roll out a budget reform plan, just like the roadmap to recovery. People say, well, what do you think about Paul Ryan's budget? Well, it's a decent start. There's some good ideas in it, but I want people talking about the DeMaio budget in a year or two. We can have ideas that we can put on the table on fiscal reform and economic reform. So I'm excited about this path forward. It doesn't mean I'm not going to play a heavy role in city issues. I care deeply about the reforms that we started. I want to make sure that our local government is accountable and transparent. And so I'm going to be focusing on a lot of areas along the lines of the local government. And we have the mayor's race coming up, where I think we're going to have a great opportunity to have a citywide dialogue on the future of our city. With that, I'll entertain any questions. Rob Weinberg, go ahead.
All right, so you're talking about
Stand up, Rob.
you want to move public sector workers on the same 401 style plans as private sector employees. Given all of that, do you support privatizing Social Security?
No, I don't. But I will tell you this: as a member of Congress who's actually implemented major change in an entitlement program, a retirement program here in San Diego, and done so in a manner that protects taxpayers and protects employees, I believe I have a lot of credibility on the issue to provide leadership. Right now, it's unfortunate that members of both parties are using Social Security and Medicare as a political football. They don't want to solve the problem in many cases. And I believe that unless we address the issues of those programs not being sustainable, we will not have retirement security for retirees. We also will not have sustainability in the federal budget. So I'm going to be laying out ideas ranging from cutting the costs of how we administer the benefits. I think healthcare reform is critical for Medicare reform and sustainability in Medicare, because if we can lower the cost of medicine, if we can have quality healthcare at a lower cost, it only benefits the Medicare system because we're paying less for those services. Transformation, non-political approaches to solving the problems. That's what I'm offering. And I have the credibility of actually succeeding in addressing an unsustainable system on the brink of bankruptcy. No other member of Congress that I know of has been able to do that. They can talk about Medicare and Social Security, but none of them have done what we've done here in San Diego, which is actually fix the problem. It's a pretty big deal. I hope to use that as the launching point, that credibility that we've established, to engage both parties in reasonable solutions. Yes, go ahead. I'll go to you afterwards, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to ask, this is not Congress, but more of a state issue. The latest thing that came out about the driver's license for the illegals, and where this is heading down the road in the state and in the nation. Because, I mean, we all pay our taxes, we've all been, our family's been immigrants at some point in time, going through the right channels. And I just see this as a way of taking money that is meant for people paying taxes and citizens, losing money going to all these other programs.
And I think you're talking about the state legislation that just passed the past week. I haven't read the legislation, I've just seen it mentioned, so I want to spend some more time figuring out exactly what they're doing. But let me give some observations on what is a pretty emotional issue. First, we are a nation of immigrants. We're proud of that. It makes us stronger as a nation, not weaker. But with that immigration comes certain responsibilities that you comply with the law. And citizenship is a right, a privilege that you have to work to achieve. There's certain obligations that we all have as citizens. Our immigration system is completely broken. Whether you want to put a Democrat or Republican label on that is irrelevant. Our immigration system is broken. There are many people who come here legally. They're not swimming across the water. They're coming here legally as part of a worker program. And they want to be citizens. They establish friendships and families here in the U.S. But because we have a broken immigration system, they have to choose between their new life here and going back because they haven't been able to get through the process quick enough. Some of them are waiting 10 years, 8 years. So let's understand that this is an issue, first and foremost, when you strip it down of all the partisan rhetoric, we have a broken immigration system and citizenship review system in the United States. And that shouldn't be a Democrat or Republican issue. We should say, if people want to come to the United States, we ought to have a system that allows them to become citizens if they comply, if they work and earn their citizenship. Licenses. If you go to another country, are you allowed to drive a car? I got back from Europe, I rented a car. It's cheaper than going through the tour bus. Do you think that people coming here on vacation should be able to operate vehicles? I think that's pretty commonsensical. I don't think there's a Democrat or Republican way to game that system. If someone is here on a temporary guest worker program, a 2-year program, And as part of that guest worker program, that they're compliant with it. They're here legally. They're given a job, and they have to operate a vehicle. Should we want to make sure that they can pass a driver's license test? I mean, they're here under a guest worker program. So I think that when you really take a look at the issues and take the labels off, you'll find that there are common sense reforms that we need to make in the immigration system. But because the polarizing forces on both sides of this issue, it's more of a political weapon that they're using rather than a thoughtful approach to sensible immigration reform. I want to go to Washington and I want to solve problems. And immigration, obviously, is one of the key broken systems that we have in the U.S. Yes, right in the back. Oh, you got it? Okay, yes, sir.
To continue along this line over here, this summer, I heard on the radio a number of times that there are people coming across the border saying that they're afraid that the cartels are going to kill them. And supposedly the announcer said, well, we accepted them in, we put them in motels down by the border, we gave them Medicare, we gave them food stamps. All of a sudden this is happening. What law was passed that says we need to do this to people?
Right, and I think that that's where any sensible immigration reform should include border security. And it's not just throwing men and women at it, let's hire 20,000 more agents. Have you seen the sort of technology that we're using these days? I think unmanned aerial vehicles can be used very strategically to improve security. A lot of technology can be done here, and I don't think we have a real plan for how to secure the border. What does that look like? All I've seen from some of the politicians is, well, we're going to hire 20,000 people. Okay, so how about 18,000? Or how about 22,000? Are we going to get 10% more if we do 22,000? I haven't seen a real sensible plan, and I think the American people want to hear, how do you secure the border? How do you assure that we are not going to have people come into the country through the border, and rather that they get into the system and the immigration and naturalization system? Second, benefits. We do need to have a conversation, and we do need to reform benefit programs. No one should be getting public benefits unless they are here in compliance with the law, plain and simple. And I think taxpayers are very worried about the abuse of the system, and I think there are many instances and examples of the abuse of the system. We have to have, as part of any sensible immigration reform, protections for taxpayers in those programs. Yes, Mark?
A lot of what you said is summarizing the question. A lot of what he said throughout this talk has been summarized in the question before this, where he talked about common sense and reaching across the aisle to get lots of good ideas from lots of sources. The question I want to raise with you is, you live in a very unusual place. You live in a competitive district. There's what, 30, 40, maybe even 50 competitive districts. How do we address the issue of the fact that most of the districts, the solution is already made in the primary, and the more radical you can be within your party, the more likely you are to be elected, and you better hold that radical line, because the other guy in your party will take it away from you and will throw away a centrist candidate from any party if he doesn't toe the line every time. And therefore, you are about to join, or you are seeking to join, the Republican caucus, where your vote will no longer be yours. It belongs to the speaker.
Well, that's going to be quite a shock to Mr. Boehner or whoever is speaker when they find that the vote is not theirs, the vote is mine, and it is ultimately driven by what my constituents want. I got asked that same question by NBC News a couple weeks ago. Chuck Todd's, political, division called and said, "Hey, you're an intriguing candidate. They made me one of the, people to watch nationally. But you're running in a centrist district, and so your issues are different than the issues in the vast majority of other Republicans and Democrats that are going to be in the House. So you may win based upon your approach and common sense and reaching across the aisle. But that's not how these other people win, because those issues are different." And I said, I challenge your logic there. If you go out, because people love polls, so let's talk about polls in terms of what people think the public wants, and you ask a question, in this district, the 52nd, what are the most important issues? Number one, the fiscal crisis, debt, the budget. So fiscal crisis, budget, and debt. What's the second most important problem? The economy. Get people back to work, help working families out. What's the third most important issue? Well, it tends to be kind of like an overall complaint about broken government. We see all this money being spent in Washington. I really want to see the environment or education work or veterans programs, but it's broken. People talk about healthcare reform in that same bucket, which is, we got this law that was passed, but I'm really worried because it doesn't look like we're getting any sort of progress in terms of coverage and whatnot. Everyone's fighting over it. I'm not seeing results. So, fiscal crisis, economic prosperity, and fix these broken programs. Those are the top 3 issues. I said, you know what? I've seen polling from some of these so-called safe conservative districts. Do you know what the top 3 issues are?
Same thing.
Number 1, fix the fiscal crisis, debt, and budget. What's number 2? Fix the economy. What's number 3? Boy, there's a lot of broken programs. These veteran benefits programs, you know, a whole list of smaller programs that people talk about that are generically, wait a minute, we've given you guys money, they're spending the money, why aren't we seeing a better result? Where are the social issues? Down at the low end of the spectrum. So here's what I basically told them. I believe the best way to get reelected is to solve the problems that people care about. And if we can show how we're making progress on the budget deficit and the long-term sustainability of our national finances, if we can cut the red tape on small businesses and help support the working family through job training programs, get people back to work, and if we can fix broken programs for a whole host of program areas that people care about, then I believe good government is actually the best platform to run on. And whether you're in a safe district or a toss-up district, I think those issues are ultimately going to be the same. You know, we're going to see real soon. I mean, I'm up 10 points, 14 points in the polls. I carried this district by 16 points in the mayor's race. I won youth, Latinos, Asians, women, independents in this 52nd district in the 2012 election, during the Obama wave. I hope that people aren't going to look at this and say it's a toss-up seat. I think they're going to say it's a safe seat. Why? Because I'm going to be getting things done for the 52nd district. I'm going to be making a difference in Washington. Look, I don't, having been a businessman, and I could go back into business at any time, I'm not running for office to be part of the country club. I know that there's a lot of elected officials who just want to be in office. They like to have the title. They go to the parties. I'm not there to do that. I don't have time for that. I have to be working hard to make sure that we can advance the issues that we're trying to solve. Yes, Larry. And back there, Pete.
My question's on foreign policy, because Congress has a great deal to do with foreign policy. So within the last 2 weeks, America almost went to war against Syria. So would you comment on how Obama's handling the crisis in Syria and vis-a-vis the security for Israel with the relationship with the United States?
Great issues. I came out very unequivocally and clearly, no, I would not vote to authorize military strikes in Syria. I know that my opponent never took a position on that most important issue. I do appreciate the fact that the president followed the constitutional process and asked Congress for advice and consent. Other administrations have not, and so we have to insist that when we discuss the use of force, going to war, putting American service members' lives in harm's way, that we do so in public, we go to the people's house to have a vote, that there be a clear and legitimate and unequivocal national security interest for the United States. And third, that we send them in there based on a plan of action where we are confident, not assured, but confident of success. The president did the first, he asked for advice and consent, but he failed on the second 2 tests. No clear national security interest. And more importantly, no plan for success. It looked like if we were to strike, it would be lose, 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 lose. Not only for us, but for our allies in the Middle East, most importantly Israel. Because they may not be able to strike the U.S., but they certainly can go and take out their aggression on Israel. A more thoughtful approach is to identify how do we deal with extremism in the Middle East. How do we protect our allies? How do we protect our homeland from extremist forces? It's not easy. It's not as simple as doing an airstrike. It is a complicated, very long-term proposition. But I'll tell you this, a missile strike with no plan of success would complicate the very important mission